Hello, everyone. My name is DiSanti, and thank you for your interest in my presentation on an ecological framework of sports specialization pathways. So briefly situating the problem of sports specialization, we believe in from research evidence that there is potential harm from athletes in their development in terms of physical and psychological outcomes from specializing early and intensively, yet we still see this as a rising trend amongst youth athletes. So trying to figure out what might be driving some of these decisions to specialize despite recommendations against it, we adopted an approach that was first ecological, so looking at characteristics of the person and their environment and how the processes of these interacting facets might then play out over time. Secondly, looking at a developmental approach, so using the developmental model of sport participation, how an athlete's decision to specialize early, late, or not at all then impacts their development. And then lastly, a perception-based approach. So not just what the athlete is doing, but how they're perceiving their own experience, how they're perceiving specialization as they map out their pathway over time. So based on this approach, as well as our review of literature and ongoing research, we situated these variables based into three main categories. First, we had ecological factors, which were individual characteristics. So in terms of the athlete's perception of their ability within signature sport, how much they like it, and how much they believe their decision is within or within outside their control of specializing or continuing multi-sport. Next were the contextual characteristics, which were listed from the research with different characteristics that have been shown to be associated with different rates in specialization. Next, we had the specialization factors, which were first behavioral. So what was the athlete's perceived pathway of what they did of specializing or not specializing, as well as their general perceptions of specialization using a novel skill to quantify how the athlete felt about specializing in terms of being extremely negative to extremely positive. Lastly, there was a set of perceptual factors which were meant to map the different dimensions of a sport experience in terms of sport enjoyment, social enjoyment, and performance success in thinking of what an athlete expected to get from their pathway and then comparing that to what they actually experienced as they approached the end of their developmental pathway. So to examine these variables, we used a survey study that was created and collected with 132 high school sport participants in this total sample. From our sample, we saw that over half of them specialized before high school, and by the time they had taken the survey and were in high school, almost 3/4 of them were specializing. And this is a particularly high rate when we consider what we know about the rate of those that will go on to continue to participate at higher levels of sport after high school. Next, when we looked for the mean for the number of sports they played, we saw that this was greater than 1 and actually closer to 2 for all three of these pathways. So this underscores the idea that it's not just what an athlete is doing in terms of playing one versus multiple sports, but how they perceive themselves, even if they're using a secondary sport to stay in shape or to kind of balance out their calendar. Next, when we looked at the perceptions of specialization, we saw that those in the specialized pathways of early or late specialization perceived specialization significantly more positively in comparison to those who played multiple sports. So whether this is a cause or effect of those pathways, it appears that athletes who are more favorable perceiving specialization are more likely to adopt this pathway. Next, when we look at one of the contextual characteristics of school size, we saw that those in the largest class of schools actually perceive specialization less favorably than those who were in a smaller class of school. And from what we know about the characteristics of the schools that were in a sample, this lends support to those that have structural considerations for trying to promote multi-sport participation, that they may be able to then outweigh some of these characteristics, such as increased competition for roster spots or playing time. So I think, again, a encouraging sign for those who are proponents of multi-sport. In terms of the correlation between affect and specialization perceptions, we saw that there was this positive affect. So they were asked in comparison to other sports how much they like their signature sport, which when we think about, is there a right way to specialize, this may give some idea there that if an athlete is feeling like they like one sport much more than others, they may then like specializing more as well. And then lastly, when we look at the different elements between expectations and experience variables, we saw these positive correlations and significant correlations between the different facets that were surveyed. So maybe illustrating that even despite pathways of early or late or not at all specializing, that athletes are generally getting the experience that they are signing up for. So in conclusion, we hope that this framework can serve as a guide for future methodological development as well as research questions as we break apart these different elements of specializing and try to develop a better ecological understanding. Thank you.